A systematic literature review of 70 publications indicate that childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. Strong correlations were shown to exist between various adverse childhood experiences and later symptoms or diagnoses of depression and anxiety disorders, especially in people who abuse drugs and alcohol. 10 types of childhood trauma have been identified in research literature: physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, neglect, exposure to domestic violence, household substance abuse, household mental illness and suicidality, parental separation and divorce, and incarcerated household members. Starting in May of 1998 and still in progress throughout the U.S. today, an ACE study assessed the long-term impacts of abuse and household dysfunction during childhood on the following outcomes in adults: disease risk factors, quality of life, healthcare utilization, and mortality. The ACEs study revealed several discoveries. ACEs are common. Nearly 64% of adults have at least one. They cause adult onset of chronic disease such as cancer and heart disease, mental illness, violence, and being a victim of violence. ACEs don't occur alone. If you have one, there's an 87% chance that you will have two or more. People with high ACE scores are more likely to be violent, to have more marriages, more broken bones, more drug prescriptions, more depression, and more autoimmune disease. People with an ACE score of 6 or higher is at risk of their lifespan being shortened by 20 years. ACEs are responsible for a big chunk of workplace absenteeism, for the cost of health care, mental health, and criminal justice. In a population level, it doesn't matter which of the ACEs a person has, the harmful consequences are the same. They have the same impact on the person. The public health impact of childhood adversity is evident in very strong association between childhood adversity and depression symptoms, antisocial behavior, drug use during early adulthood. The good news is that the brain is plastic and that the body wants to heal. The brain is continually changing in response to the environment. If the toxic stress stops and is replaced by practices that build resilience, the brain can slowly undo many of the stress-induced changes. During the ACEs study, no data was collected on protective or strength-oriented factors that may have been a part of the lives of those in the sample. Only the risk factors were assessed. However, resiliency theory supplies the conceptual scaffolding for studying and understanding why some youth grow up to be healthy adults in spite of risk exposure. Resilient children can be described as children who weather adverse circumstances, function well despite challenges or threats, and bounce back from traumatic events. An astounding finding in a long-term study has showed that at least 50%, if not closer to 70% of youth growing up in high-risk conditions do develop social competence despite exposure to severe stress and do overcome the odds that lead to successful lives. Why do some children adapt and overcome while others bear lifelong scars that flatten their potential? A growing body of evidence points to one common answer. Every child who winds up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. Understanding the importance of that relationship, as well as other emerging findings about science of resilience, allows us to assess whether current programs designed to help disadvantaged kids are working. The developing brain relies upon the consistent interactions that happen between a young child and a primary caregiver. When these interactions occur regularly, they provide the scaffolding that helps build key capacities, things like the ability to plan, monitor, and regulate behavior and adapt to changing circumstances, that enable children to respond to adversity and to thrive. The developing brain is buffered by this feedback loop between biology and the environment. In the absence of these responsive adults, relationships, the brain structure doesn't develop optimally. The stress becomes toxic, making it more difficult for children to adapt and rebound. There's a common set of characteristics that predispose children to positive outcomes in the face of adversity. Having at least one stable caregiver, a sense of mastery over life circumstances, strong executive functioning and self-regulating skills, and supportive context of affirming faith or cultural traditions. Resiliency is seen across the lifespan. Research has shown that resiliency is ordinary, not extraordinary. People demonstrate resiliency all the time. One example is September 11th terrorist attack and individuals' efforts to rebuild their lives. Being resilient does not mean that a person doesn't experience difficulty or distress. Emotional pain and sadness are common in people who have suffered major adversity or trauma in their lives. In fact, the road to resiliency is likely to involve considerable emotional distress. Resiliency is not a trait that people either have or don't have. It involves behaviors and thoughts and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. During a study, researchers interviewed married older adults and then did a follow-up interview with those whose spouses had died. The typical pattern of grieving shown by 46% of the sample was resilience. The resilient mourners expressed acceptance of the death as a natural process after their loss. These findings demonstrate that doing well after a loss is not necessarily a cause for concern, but rather a normal response by older adults, particularly those with a high aptitude for resiliency. The APA recommends 10 ways to improve resiliency. Make connections. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problem. You can't change the fact that highly stressful events happen, but you can change how you interpret and respond to these events. Accept that change is a part of living. Accept your circumstances that cannot be changed and help you focus on circumstances that you can alter. Move towards your goals, even if it seems like you are only making small accomplishments. You're still moving forward. Take decisive action. Act on adverse situations as much as you can. Look for opportunities of self-discovery. Nurture a positive view of yourself. Develop confidence in your abilities to solve problems and trust in your instincts. That helps build resilience.